CounterCult Awareness Month podcast. This is going to be an annual series that we put out during August. And so I'm very excited to have Dr. Rincon as our very first guest. Dr. Rincon came highly recommended through Lisa Kendall, who's the founder of the CounterCult Coalition. And Dr. Rincon works for the Venezuela Voices for Oregon or in Oregon. Sorry if I got that wrong. And so she is here to discuss the issues of immigration and the dangers and their vulnerabilities towards potentially being involved in cult, or I guess getting involved in cults and other types of coercive situations. I'm really looking forward to our talk. Thank you so much for coming. Could you share a little bit about yourself, Dr. Rincon?
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, as we delve into the challenges that are faced by immigrants, I think it is crucial to discuss this pressing issue, the risk of being targeted by manipulative individuals or organizations. So immigrants are vulnerable. That's why I brought this topic today. And today we will focus on the intersection of cults and migrants. My name is Giselle Rincon, and I'm from Caracas, Venezuela. And according to the Interagency Coordination Platform for Refugees and Migrants from Venezuela, by November 2023, there were almost 8 million Venezuelans, migrants, and refugees worldwide, mainly in Colombia and Peru. That's an incredible.
I was going to say that's an amazing amount of people. So, yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as June 3rd, 2024, it is estimated that 6,590,000 Venezuelan refugees and migrants live in Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's the biggest Latin American migration crisis happening right now in the world. According to UNCOR recent data from May 2024, there are 545,200 Venezuelans in the US. That's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. So you're from Venezuela originally, yeah? So can you tell me more about your background and your history?
Yeah, so I was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Caracas, Venezuela. I returned to the United States by plane 23 years ago. When I arrived, I have a legal job, stable job, and I felt a lack of belonging. Just arriving to a new place, try to adapt to a new community, and I thought I could feel understood and cared by joining a group of people beside my small family.
Yeah, that's pretty
certain,
normal.
yeah,
Sounds like a normal experience.
and in a certain way, I felt I was vulnerable as well. I had to use my prior preparation or common sense to make the right decisions. And that was a hard thing to do because you have the feelings, you have the heart, you have the head, and you want to just feel good, right? You want to feel welcome and care. And I was invited to several churches to begin with, and I did not join them because they did not seem suitable for me, for example. There was something that I was listening in my heart. This is not for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or some people call it intuition, so people call it sixth sense. And I was like, no, I don't feel like this is for me. This one is not for me. I was patient. I'm thankful that I was patient enough to find the one that worked for me. And after so many years, I found groups for things that I enjoy, also for my leisure time or my interests, like Latin American dances, or ideas about in a book club, or things that I want to do and have finding that balance and that safety net, right? Yeah. So right now, I will say that my focus here will be based on my experience as immigrants or now refugees, that we have so many from refugees from Venezuela here in the United States and all over, that being is more strongly related to community factors than to individual religiosity and practice.
So what I understand is when people migrate or become refugees and go to other countries, they're not really looking to fulfill necessarily a religious need or piety. They're just looking for community to belong because they're alone and they're new in the area. That sounds reasonable, yeah. So when did this shift occur in Venezuela? What happened in Venezuela that sort of started this shift of immigration?
Yeah. Venezuela has been in an awful situation around 24, 25 years ago since then. But I would say starting 2010, it shifted from a destination to an origin country for migrants due to economic issues, food
Hmm.
shortage, limited healthcare access, lack of cash, and political polarization. And these conditions prompt many to seek better opportunities abroad. In 2017, immigration surged with Venezuelans seeking new destinations beyond traditional ones.
Okay.
So this increased migration has challenged other countries around the world, yeah, and in the region, prompting, for example, some South American states to use exiting migration tools and others to implement new legal measures, underscoring the need for adaptable migration governance.
Okay. So they presented a challenge that was causing systems to, I'm imagining, like bottleneck a bit as they're dealing with all of the immigrants coming from Venezuela. So it gave them an opportunity to improve their policies and systems around that immigration.
I would say that before 20 years ago, the mode of migration was usually a airplane.
Mhm.
But then I would say beginning 2010, 2014, began many people migrating by foot, which is a very hard way to do it and vulnerable and devastating way to do it, right? I would say that in the United States, our Venezuelan groups has been identifying as the 12th largest population of Hispanic
Wow.
or in the United States.
Okay.
So it's still the minority of the minority,
Yeah, of course.
but it's growing,
It's not a
right?
small number, that's for sure.
But over the period from 2000 to 2021, the Venezuelan origin population in the US increased, guess what? 592%. And the Venezuelan foreign born population grew 554%.
Wow. That's again, not a small number.
Yeah, this is telling you something is going on, something big is going on, right?
Yeah. That's a really good background. I think it gives us a good idea of the importance of why we're talking about Venezuela and what you do and why you're doing it, because this is not a small number of people that could be vulnerable, are vulnerable, that need attention. Because I think I saw somewhere a statistic, that's the right word, that they compromise 1% of the Hispanic population here. But when we think about it, the number, what do we have, 7 billion people or something? The number, or I don't know what the number is for for the United States population, but 1% of whatever that number is still not a small number. I think sometimes our brains grasp 1% as a really small amount, but by increasing 592% is, wow. Okay, thank you for that. So before we move on, we've already talked about some of these words, but do you mind defining some words so that our listeners can be on the same page? Let's define words like refugee, asylum seeker, and migrant. And also I'm curious about migrant versus immigrant, if there is a difference in that word as well.
Yeah, so we need to understand the differences between refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, in order to understand how vulnerable they become. The terms refugee and asylum seeker and migrant are used to describe people who are on the move, okay? Who have left their countries and have crossed borders. The terms migrant and refugee are often used interchangeable, but it's essential to distinguish between them, and there is a legal difference, okay? So let's put it in simple words. Refugee is a person who flees their country due to serious human rights violations
Okay.
or persecution, seeking safety because their government cannot or will not protect them. So refugees have a right to international protection.
Okay.
Asylum seeker is a person who has left their country seeking protection from persecution or serious human rights violation and has not yet been legally recognized as a refugee and is awaiting a decision on their asylum claim. Okay?
Okay. There's an entity that declares this group of people a group of refugees, and that's where they're like being recognized as a refugee. But if that group has not been declared as refugees by whatever the entity is, then individuals can become asylum seekers. And
Yes.
okay, got it.
And a migrant is a person living outside the country
Okay.
of origin who is not an asylum seeker, nor a refugee.
Okay.
Migrant live because of work or study or family or poverty, political unrest, gun violence, natural disaster, other severe circumstances. So migrant don't have necessarily a political status.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And
Now, immigrants, going back to your
yeah.
question, is the migrants to come in to this country. In our perspective, we're here in the US, and the one who comes in, right?
Okay, I see.
Mhm.
Okay, so to distinguish the difference between a migrant and an immigrant, it depends on what side of the border you're on.
Yes.
Okay, I get it. Okay, can you explain a little bit more to me why immigrants are vulnerable at all to as they come in? What makes them vulnerable?
Yeah, there are many reasons they can be vulnerable. Not only arriving to a new place, arriving to a new community, they don't know where to find the resources. They don't know one who trusts to, and who can help them to solve their problems. So there can be vulnerable to exploitation, for example, for many reasons. Okay. I will mention some of them, okay? Probably there are more, but I will say the most that I found common are, for example, exploitation for temporary work. For example, temporary migrant workers may not have the freedom to choose their employment,
Okay.
or making them dependent on their employer and susceptible to abuse, for example.
Okay.
Another one is undocumented status. Many migrants don't have the information that they need their documents to migrate, and they just decide to leave the country without documents, legal
Okay.
documents to the next country. Undocumented immigrants may be unlikely to complain to their employers or authorities, as they could lose their income, be deported, or be locked up.
And as far as I understand, people who exploit their undocumented status often use their undocumented status as a way to capture them and keep them there. So it isn't, I agree with you that people could they could be worried they could lose their status. That's just the basis of it. But I guess bad guys could also, or bad people could also exploit that even more, knowing that's a fear and concern, and say, if you don't do exactly what I tell you, I'm going to report you to ISIS.
Right, right?
Yeah. So I've heard of many stories of that going on. Not specifically Venezuelan, but immigrants in general.
It is a very sad situation, undocumented status, not only because of the threat of you're going to lose your job. From the immigrant perspective, they decided not to complain
Mm-hmm.
to violation of human rights or injustices, because they fear not only they're going to lose their job, they fear of their safety, they fear for their family. It's a very sad situation, this one.
Yeah. I'm from the cult NXIVM, and one of the famous sort of stories that came from NXIVM was the girl who was locked up for 2 years in an unlocked room. So we talk about that a lot. Part of the reason why she stayed in the room, if you will, was the constant threat that if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to drop you off at the border without any paperwork and without any documents. And so that would have gotten her in trouble. Eventually that did occur. They actually did follow through on that with the girl's dad present, who was participating in it. And so they dropped her off at the border and she went into Mexico. She was able to get some help to get all of her documents again, thankfully. But it was very stressful, according to what she reported, a nightmare.
Yeah. Another way of being vulnerable, continue to the same line, is personal characteristics. Sometimes we don't think about it, but it's true. Immigrants may be vulnerable due to their age or gender, identity, race, disability, or health,
Okay.
right? Another way to be vulnerable is the migration process. For example, the migration process itself can be very risky. with migrants potentially losing documents, facing health stressors, or being exposed to criminal elements and gender-based violence.
Yes, definitely. Okay, can you tell me some examples of how once they're over here and in their vulnerable state, what other kind of exploitations or specific exploitations are some of these people experiencing?
Yeah, some clear images could be, there are many, but we can identify like being bullied
Mhm.
or threatened by an
Oh yeah,
employer,
I just talked about that.
having a passport or money withheld,
Just talked about that too.
being unable to leave the workplace, having to ask permission to eat, to sleep, or use the toilet,
Okay.
having no time off from work, or being subjected to unsafe working conditions, such as long hours, low wages, and exposure to hazards,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, this is not, it's tangentially related, but I had an au pair from Brazil whom I love. She's part of the family. And we had to very meticulously map out her work hours due to not wanting to exploit anything related to her. So while my au pair lived in our house and cooked and cleaned and was there 24/7, I was a single mom. I had to make sure that I wasn't leaning on her outside of work hours and things like that, so that it was like a lot of mental work for me because I was a sleep deprived mom, but that was me being someone who's not trying to exploit someone. It was a lot. It was a heavy mental load for me to really compartmentalize her hours and to keep track of all that time. And I guess I'm saying that like even though it's hard work, it's really important. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, even like you mentioned, in a family, in a home,
Mhm.
they even have the rights to have their time to sleep, time to eat, time to even to relax,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To recharge. Yeah, yeah, totally. Thank you for that. That's a great example.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to dangers. What are some of the dangers that they exploitation is a danger in and of itself, but what can you elaborate on some of the dangers that migrants are experiencing?
Yeah, so I will focus on the Venezuelan population, the community. And Venezuelan have several ways to enter the United States legally. For example, as a refugees or asylum seekers on humanitarian parole or temporary protected status called TPS, among others, right? But
Uh-huh.
if Venezuelans decide not to use those or use it or not,
Right.
they can be in danger, right? So particularly those with lower incomes may not have be aware of these options, right?
Yeah.
To have enter illegally on food, by food, by migrants on food are very vulnerable to people who take advantage of them, right? Taking their money, abusing them. So many Venezuelans migrating on foot cross the Darien Gap in Panama. And
Mhm.
this is a very dangerous place.
Okay.
Okay, a jungle. And the Darien Gap is a 60-mile stretch of roadless rainforest on the Colombian-Panama border, okay?
Okay.
Known as the only break in the 19,000-mile Pan American Highway. So in steep mountains, swamps, dense forests, turbulent rivers, dangerous wildlife, high humidity, make it too hostile for infrastructure and difficult to police. And it has an earning a reputation of a very horrible place.
Okay.
Venezuela has crossed this daring gap and they just got traumatized. They got the trauma of all the horrible things they have seen murders, they have seen people being violated in many ways, they have seen people being robbed. I would say this is a very difficult place to decide to go. People must be desperate. Nobody wants to leave the country. Let's to begin with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You leave your country because there external situation or internal situation that don't give you the safety or the freedom to live in peace. So imagine how desperate people are just to know that's a horrible place and they decided to go through. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Who would go through that just for funsies? Nobody.
So there are two main important dangers for the Venezuelans, migrants, by food, okay? Food, bus, anything that you go on the road, right? It could be number one, human trafficking.
Okay.
Okay. Human trafficking is a significant danger for migrants in general, and human trafficking victims do not have a single defining characteristic. Okay. The traffickers often target people who are vulnerable, like with poverty, limited English proficiency, unlawful immigration status, unstable housing, limited economic or educational opportunities. So these are victims, and they are deceived with false promises, okay, of love or good job or stable life, and forced to deplorable working condition with little or no pay. Okay.
Yes. This is the term. I know that there was a movie a couple of years ago that was released, and I don't know how accurate the movie was, but it was about trafficking, human trafficking. And so a lot of people were using buzzwords. And in my studies, the buzzwords are actually real words that we use in our studies too. So it was a little bit difficult to suss through at the time. I remember of what was people were saying that was from the movie, which may or may not have been accurate versus what was really happening. But this is that concept of I believe the coyotes, the people who are called coyotes, who are going across, making promises to these people. Yeah, we'll get you across for $15,000. And these people barely had $15 to their name. So trying to get them across with the promise of, we'll get you into a good job. You'll be able to pay back the $15,000 right away. And then they go basically straight into human or sex, mostly sex trafficking, and never are able to pay their debt.
Yeah, even I even heard stories simple as they took a bus, the bus stopped for a bathroom break,
Mhm.
and they told women's go to the left, men's go to the right, and as soon as the women go to the left, they
Mhm.
are in a room and they're immediately kidnapped. And
Mhm.
I'm like, what? Yeah,
Yeah,
they
no chance. Huh?
go to the bathroom and they just got forced to prostitution or forced to any kind of horrible labor.
Yeah.
Um,
But it sounds like how easy, I don't want to say easy is the right term, but how efficient Auschwitz was during the Nazi sort of Jewish encampment process, where they would just separate people by lines and people didn't had no clue what they were walking into. So I guess that's a regular tactic that's used.
yeah. And I would say the second danger will be the cult. I would say that when a group tries to control members' behavior, thoughts, emotions, and information, these are red flags that that group could be a cult.
Yes, it's the bite model. Yeah.
Yeah, so what is a cult? Let's begin with that. What is a cult? And how migrants can migrants be prevented from joining harmful cults? I would say, based on in simple words, cults are tightly knit social groups centered around fervent devotion to a specified ideology,
Hmm.
okay, or a leader or a set of beliefs. And unlike mainstream religious or social organization, these cults groups they exert high control over the member's life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a very simplified and helpful definition. The cult community has tried to stay pretty far away from making a single definition of it because there's so many different cults out there, so many different types of cults, so many different ways to exploit people, as we just saw that in the trafficking, the sheer amount of ways to exploit people. But I think that Travers did a good job at making it a very simplified definition there.
Yeah. So it is we need to know that people are attracted to cults because they are searching for community, like we mentioned before, searching for support and clarity in life.
Yeah, there's I guess, a phrase that people say that people don't join cults, they join community. They join like groups that are beneficial. So, like you said, community, they join for support, they for purpose, they join for having something to do. But yeah, they don't join a cult just out of the gate. Nobody, like if someone was like, "Hey, you want to join my thing where you have to be devoted to me and worship me and get a brand," most people would be like, "Absolutely not. That's not going to happen. You're crazy," and then walk away.
These guys, right? This is
Yeah,
this.
exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, tell me a little bit more about um the situation with cults and Venezuelan immigrants.
I would say that when Venezuelans migrants, and could happen to any migrants, many migrants feel isolated or lonely. That's a very common feeling, right?
Yeah.
And when they find someone who is in a cult or find a group like a cult, they promise of an instant, tiny community that can be incredibly appealing. They present themselves as a welcoming and inclusive, offering a sense of family. And of course, the acceptance is immediate, right? You feel like, oh, that's what I want, right?
Yeah.
Uh, just to be comforted and reassuring, providing emotional support, social support. And that's something very attractive, right? I would say the codes, in essence, they exploit the fundamental human needs for connection and understanding. They offering an attractive community package of support and clarity, and they often have detrimental consequences. We need to be clear about that. Understanding these motivations can help people to recognize the signs to and protect themselves from others from these manipulative tactics.
I agree that cults have this appeal, and I can imagine. I've moved. I know this is a really weird fact for me, but I've moved about 93 times in my whole life. Started out me being like a child of poverty, and so we never really could. We were always running from rent when I was a younger girl, but we lived from family member to my grandmother had 16 kids, so we never had a lack of people we could live with. And then after that, my mom married into the military, which I think, was probably an extension of her moving a lot too. And then so we moved a lot for the military, and I just kept that pattern up as young adults and moving a lot. Sometimes the moves were multiple states away. So anyway, and for me, moving to a different state was in the very early stages of my life was a little bit hard because I didn't really understand how to make friends. And as I got older, I just stopped caring about making friends. And so it was like I hardened myself to the fact that I was just going to not have friends and I would be lonely forever. And when you look at my story of having joined NXIVM, like that whole story of regularly being exposed to new environments to the point where I like permanently isolated myself in that sense. It makes a lot of sense when I was finally offered this organization that's a community and a family, and like you stated, and they were here for this higher purpose and we can help you get past your loneliness. I I went right into it, and I wasn't even an immigrant. I just happened to move a lot, which was my foundation of what was my into that situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So for migrants, and from your experience in your studies, who is at risk of joining a cult, in your opinion?
I would say anybody could be at risk who feels lonely, who feels isolated, who feels that they have this, I would say, emptiness, right, inside them. Because what everybody's looking for at some point is instant acceptance, support, community. And if a cult is offering that, even though it's not named as a cult, like you mentioned before, they don't identify as that.
Hmm.
It's very exciting to have a place like that. No, I would say that there are ways that we can identify and protect themselves. Right, people can protect. For example, avoid sharing your financial information
Yeah.
or go to remote locations in a place that you're not going to be with people that you feel safe. Why you're going to expose yourself in a way that you are going to be vulnerable, right? In
Yes.
a remote where escape may be difficult, for example. Brainwashing is easier in isolated environments, for example.
Okay.
Many cults use the lure of a retreat to entice people. A retreat. And not all,
It's
but it's
only
kind of like,
18 hours long every day for 10 days straight.
I would say that based on what I found in research, there is an estimated of 20 million US victims. And it's likely that even if you have not had a direct contact with a cult, someone who has.
Yeah, for certain. So we know that cults are a big problem in the United States. We talk about it, we've got documentaries about it, but what I haven't seen too much is documentaries about cults in other countries. I know that it's a vulnerable that the Venezuelan migrants are vulnerable coming over to here for cults, especially. And I'm also aware that many cults operate internationally. Like NXIVM had a center in Monterey, a center in other places that I can't remember the names of, in like Mexico, for instance. But what I'm wondering is outside of the American-based cults that expanded into South America and other countries, what other types of cults would they have already heard about or experienced while they're in Venezuela or
Well,
Latin America as a whole?
yeah. So before I begin responding that question, I would say that we need to know some kind of background about the Venezuelan culture and identity.
Yeah.
Venezuelan culture and identity is a mix of European descendants, indigenous communities, African descendants. So each of those cultures bring their traditions, their customs,
Mhm.
even the way that they worship, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So in the Venezuelan community right now, there are many practices that they don't seem part of a cult. They seem part of the culture. So I would say that in Latin America, in overall, there are around 50,000 sets in Latin America.
Mhm.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And if you talk about someone from Latin America, they probably will say, no, that's not that much. But actually, it is so immersed in a society, the many practices and ways of behavior that people feel like it's natural, it's part of the culture. So that's a dangerous thing, right?
Yeah.
I would say that the influence of the occultism, bioenergy, mental control, esoterica, mystic, magical thought, with a blend of Catholicism,
Of course. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
sadly is normal, right?
Okay.
And cults are Venezuela. Let me tell you, cults are prevalent in Venezuela with notable examples like the cult of Maria Leonza and Santeria.
Okay.
Okay, let me tell you more. La Maria Leonza
Please.
cult,
I've never heard of these. I've heard of Santeria, but not Maria Leonza.
Maria Leonza cult was originated in the 1920s in the Sorte Mountain. It's a blend of African, indigenous, and Catholic beliefs revolving around Maria Leonza as a goddess of love, peace, nature, harmony.
And
If
who
we see
doesn't like those things?
exactly, if we see
Yeah,
it that way, who wouldn't like that, right?
yeah, exactly.
The Sorte Mountain in Yaracuy served as a primary pilgrimage site, okay, were believed to house Maria Leonza's subterranean palace.
Okay.
There are rituals, including chanting, drumming, trance, self-harming, drawing thousands of for annual pilgrims seeking healing and guidance. These situations can be scary situations, okay? All the things that happen there. Maria Leonza is depicted as a diverse and ever-changing figure, facilitating like a spiritual contact through visual creativity. So the Santeria now is rooted in the African traditions and expanded since 2008 and combines Yoruba religion, Haitian voodoo is very common, the voodoo in Latin America, especially in the Caribbean, Christianity, a mix of Christianity, Spiritism is very common too, involving rituals like animal sacrifices.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a very dense, heavy experience situation.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
it's very serious.
What draws them to these, since there is things like self-harm and animal sacrifices? What would what is it about a person that would be like oh, that is the best way that I'm going to be able to live my life? Or are these sacrifices and self-harm things something that they don't learn about till they're fully hooked into the doctrine of
Exactly. These are offerings. They call
Mhm.
it offerings
Oh, I
for the
see.
goddess.
Okay.
Mhm. Oh,
Okay, so they're not told that these are like self-harm and sacrifices. They're told that this is how you become one with God, or how you, or with the goddess, or how you can connect to the spirituality of them.
exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
makes sense. Okay.
There are many other type of cults in Venezuela, like the
Mhm.
cults of personality, right? This has been emerging like 20 years ago, the cults of personality in Venezuela, where certain politicians has revered and altars are erected in their honor.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another, yeah, another absurd phenomenon is a cult of healing, combining spiritism, local cults, and religious rituals in pursuit of magical solutions. The intertwining of medical and religious practices, for example,
Okay.
is
Yeah.
reflected in the symbolic analysis of healing cults surrounding figures like Dr. Moreno Cañas, Dr. Jose Gregorio Hernandez, which is a saint at this point by the Vatican, but they combine the mystic and the spiritism with the religious in a complex sociopolitical and historical dynamics that has been changing these religious practices in Latin America.
And then when you have the Catholic Church anointing them as into sainthood, that kind of seals the deal for many people in their religious beliefs and around them.
Yeah.
How can we help people learn to challenge what they're being told or what they're being taught about these things?
I would say there is a need for education.
Hmm.
Talk about these topics, promote the prevention, education about these topics. Right? Because if you don't know, you don't know. And you don't know how to identify the red flags. You don't know how to protect yourself. So I would say when immigrants arrive to a new country, for example, they not only they face numerous challenges, including the language barrier or cultural differences, but also the stress of adapting to a new environment. I will say we must equip immigrants to answer your question. We must equip immigrants with the knowledge and tools to recognize and resist these tactics.
Right.
Okay. So education in groups, education in programs, I would say to recognizing the red flags, to understanding the tactics, maybe having even access to resources, right? About this,
Hmm.
building support networks. There are several ways that can be developed in order to support the Venezuelan immigrants or migrants in general to be
Hmm.
protected about situations.
Okay. Um, your work, or from your perspective, what are some of the initiatives or that we should include for this educational components?
I would say, for example, newcomers should be aware of common red flags. For example, pressure to isolation from friends and family.
Hmm.
That should be a red flag. No one should be have the authority to isolate you as a person from your family or your friends. Okay, financial exploitation, emotional manipulation. Another way could be recognizing the signs of psychological manipulation. Okay. Another could be the knowing where to turn for help. Okay. Look for
Yes.
nonprofit. Look for price organizations that are recognized, registered organizations that can really provide psychological support, community support to navigate these challenges more effective and encourage, I would say, all immigrants to enhance their resilience, find friendship and connection that are trustworthy individuals that can help navigate these challenges. I remember when I arrived to the US, even though I was born here, but I came as an immigrant, having someone that you can trust to respond all your questions,
Hmm.
to how to do things, how to navigate. Those are your key person for survival, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be great if there was maybe there is something like this that already exists, or maybe it's what you do, but it'd be great if there was a mentorship program for immigrants who are coming in. That I do know that like when people come out of cults, like the Freedom Train, for instance, one of the services that we provide is like basic life skills. If someone is born in a cult and they've never purchased groceries on their own, for instance, we teach them how to do that. If we don't really balance checkbooks anymore these days, but if they needed to learn how to do that, then we would teach them how to manage money effectively and things like that. Because for our second generation or born-ins or whatever we want to call it, people who are in a cult, their parents or caretakers brought them into the cult and they were born or raised in the cult. As they go into adulthood, they often don't have the same understanding of reality that their parents might have who had lived outside of the cult before and then lived in. And I imagine some of those experiences of the second generations of born ins can look very similar to an immigrant's experience of not having any clue how to operate world outside of this very insulated group. So my I guess my point is hopefully we have some mentorship programs out there that are safe or considered safe for them to be able to, if they can't find a friend who they can trust, at least they can trust these mentorship programs.
Yeah, and we at Venezuela Voice in Oregon, we
Mhm.
are registered nonprofit organization in the state of Oregon. And our main vision has been creating inclusive and welcoming environments, not only for Venezuelan migrants in Oregon, but for all migrants
Mhm.
through various activities here. So we have three cores, and one is the education that we have been talking about,
Yeah.
education, right?
Yeah.
We have been providing some, you just mentioned, the educational piece on financial literacy in Spanish.
A big one. Yeah.
All the yeah, like you were mentioning, even how to write a check, how to open a bank account, how to buy a car, what is about credit score, all these, how to manage a budget. Finances in the US are very different, how you manage it compared to South America, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that we do in the educational aspect as an organization, we fundraise to find funds and apply to grants
Mhm.
for supporting immigrants that they want to complete their college graduation, university studies. Usually they're working one or two, three jobs, and it's hard to pay the college studies. So we're trying to help them and provide some scholarships
Okay.
for students. And we work this in partnership with the Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber. So we are trying to provide the best that we can to support the immigrants to succeed in this community. Yeah.
And are those scholarships available like statewide, or are they available? Like, what are the conditions for those scholarships requirement?
Well, one one of the conditions, they don't need documentation. That's something that is important. They can earn the scholarship and they don't have to have a legal status. Okay.
Okay.
They could, but they don't have to earn the scholarship. The second thing is if they are registered in a Oregon University system, university,
Mhm.
this scholarship is going to be match, meaning that it's going to be double. For example, if a student earn a $1,000 scholarship matching donation, it will be 2,000 when they get
Oh, that's
actually
wonderful.
reflected out of the university, for example. So it's like a nice surprise, right? But
Yeah.
if they go to a university outside Oregon, they just get the $1,000. It's not a match
Yeah,
donation.
that's a wonderful incentive from the Oregon State University system. All right, so we have the scholarships. What else does Venezuelan Voices do?
We have talked about the community and we strive to create community. So we are a platform for community. Okay. And I'm going to begin sharing some of the activities that we do for that is focus on culture, Venezuelan culture, but we are open to all cultures, right?
Yeah.
So we want to offer to the Oregonian community who we are, We are welcoming everybody to get to know the Venezuelan community. Many people think, oh, you speak Spanish, you come from Mexico. Actually, there are 21 countries that speak Spanish, 21 countries. Venezuela is one of those. And we are here. I know we are the minority of the minority, but we want to show and share our culture, right? So by creating this event, these spaces, then people can connect, people can get to know each other, people can see people talking a language, a culture, a dance, a music, a food. Those are the visual things that you can think about culture, but culture is more than that. How you solve problems, how you make friends, how you raise your kids, how you discipline your kids. So culture could be more than that. How you treat the elderly. There are many things in culture, and we try to provide a space and a time so people can get to know, share, connect. That's the most important part.
Yeah.
Connect and feel that they belong. They belong.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the more we have those opportunities, the ones that you provide, if they can feel that they connect and they belong in a safe group, then the chances are much lower they're going to go out and find a group that ultimately is unsafe for them. So definitely, thank you for those opportunities out there.
If people don't join those events and they are from South America or Venezuela, they say at least there is an organization that represents a culture that I know about,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that makes
You
sense.
feel community that you see, oh, I know what is that about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about work with gender, I guess gender specific work that you do?
Yeah. So in 2020, we began working to promote the protection for Venezuelan migrants,
Mhm.
and we joined the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice in the research and campaign on migration and protection for women, girls, and teenagers' rights. And that was an amazing experience, I can tell you. We participated in the Gender Migration Index, a policy guidance tool, and it was designed to emphasize the life experiences of female LGBTQIA plus and the gender diverse migrants by enhancing the civil society participation and international review processes. It was a very excited experience and joyful experience that we got to join them. We also has been highlighting the importance of the context-specific measures in preventing, mitigating, and responding the gender-based violence at the humanitarian migration nexus. So we also have been focusing on the humanitarian aspect of the need, the crisis happening in Venezuela. And we participated on a 16 days of activism campaign,
Okay.
violence experienced by women, girls, LGBTQIA plus, and the gender diverse Venezuelan migrants during their journey in host countries, like we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, all
Yeah.
the dangers and situation happening when they are migrants, right? Yeah. So
That's
I
amazing.
have been we have been doing little by little, right,
Yeah.
here and there, the community.
That sounds amazing. I'm really impressed with this. When you were showcasing it and presenting that education material, how did that group of people, how did it, what was the outcome of it?
You mean the experience when we give the workshops?
Yeah. Yeah. What was the outcome?
For example, when we give financial literacy workshops or when we give any kind of workshop for educational support,
Mhm.
we try to provide an opportunity to have the Q&A, right? So we
Mhm.
present the topic and we have the Q&A. And sometimes people are afraid to ask, like they call it dumb questions, because they expect the people think they should know, but they don't know. And we just began asking the questions, simple question. Write it in the chat. If we do it by Zoom, send in your questions.
Mhm.
There's no dumb question,
Yeah.
right? There's no question. We cannot expect everybody knows everything. It's impossible. It's not realistic. And
Mhm.
especially coming to the country, ask all the questions.
Yeah. How
Ask
can
all
you
the
expect
questions.
to know? You can't know. in many cases. Okay, so
Yeah.
I haven't traveled much. I lived in Canada for a period of time, and I think I drove to Tijuana one time. But each time I remember feeling anxious for the first time. What am I going to expect? Or the signs are all going to change into a different language, like in Tijuana, right? And in Canada, what do they drive on the opposite side of the road? I didn't know what to expect. And it was very nerve-wracking for me just to go into a bordering country that at the time was fairly open borders and stuff like that, and fairly safe, not having any clue what to expect, what when I crossed the border. And it was a little bit weird and a little bit different. And there were some symbols I'd never seen before, and it was very anxiety driven, for lack of a better term. So I can't imagine how it would be to be so far away from family in a country that definitely has a different language than, like, at least with Canada, it was still English and French based, but everything was also in English. Drink break. Okay. I am loving this. Is there anything else you want to share?
I want to share that at Venezuela's Voice in Oregon, we're all volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
We do things outside of full-time jobs, trying to make a difference and support the community. So if you or someone that is listening would like to join us, maybe visiting our website, www.venezuelasvoiceinOregon.org. We all the work and programs that we provide just to support the community. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity, Dr. Chapman. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The listeners.
Yes, thank you so much, and for the listeners. And I'm really grateful for you being our first podcast person, and you've set a wonderful precedent with your very organized information. I appreciate it, and we are going to field any questions that you have. It looks like you have an email address, venezuela.oregon@gmail.com. We'll publish all this in the description of the podcast as well, so that people can email and get in contact with you. And yes, if you want to donate to this cause, the Venezuela's voices and sorry, let me read it. Venezuela's Voices in Oregon.org. They have a GoFundMe, or you can pay with PayPal. And I'm certain that if you contact them, there's other ways that you can. I'm sure they're not going to say no to your money. So, but yes. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, listeners, for joining us and for being here for our inaugural podcast that we'll be doing every August. Happy International Cult Awareness Month. Please get out there and share content and make it a month worth remembering every year, so that we can teach people about cults and how to avoid them. And it's an International Cult Awareness Month, which is why we're even looking at this Venezuela migrant situation. So translate everything we do into other languages and get it out there so that other people can learn about this as well. Keeping in mind that as we talked about earlier, cults can look very differently in other countries. Like we talked about how in Venezuela, a cultic spiritual practices that are dangerous are just commonly accepted behaviors amongst the average households in Venezuela, due to the conglomeration of Catholicism and spiritism and occultism and making sacrifices and things like that, making offerings. And so cults can look and behave very differently in different countries and different localities. So it's really important that everyone, if you can, get involved in International Cult Awareness Month and take care of those localities, take care of the people that are near you, teach them about the cults that are nearby and what they do, how to spot it, and what the pro-social response should be. So what that means is how should we expect to behave if the way we have been behaving as a general society, say in Venezuela, is antisocial or not social, meaning it's not cool to be doing chanting and cutting yourself or harming yourself in the name of this thing. That's not a healthy way to be. Also demonstrate what the pro-social way to be, and that gives people guidance so they can actually look at what is pro-social and look at what they are doing and create a mental roadmap on how to get to where they should be. When we're identifying areas of problems, it's always helpful to also identify areas for their solutions so that people can actually work towards that solution. But anyway, I'm done off my soapbox for the moment. I once again thank you so much for coming, Dr. Rincon, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you to Lisa Kendall, who was so fabulous at getting you booked in here. And CounterCult Coalition is another Oregon nonprofit that's fabulous. I appreciate everything. And with all that, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.